but I don't mind upsetting. But I don't want to upset children. Right.
Yes.
Right. So this reading introduces one of the book's central characters. Crystal Whedon has just got into trouble with her deputy headmaster for shouting out during school assembly at the news that her coach, her sports coach, has dropped dead. The room set aside for the guidance department at Winterdown Comprehensive opened off the school library. It had no windows and was lit by a single strip light. Tessa Wall, head of guidance and wife of the deputy headmaster, entered the room at 10:30, numb with fatigue and carrying a cup of strong instant coffee that she had brought up from the staff room. She was a short, stout woman with a plain, wide face, who cut her own greying hair. The blunt fringe was often a little lopsided, wore clothes of the homespun, crafty variety, and light jewellery of beads and wood. Today's long skirt might have been made of hessian, and she had teamed it with a thick, lumpy cardigan in pea green. Tessa hardly ever looked at herself in full-length mirrors, and boycotted shops where this was unavoidable. She sank into her chair with a low groan, took off her wristwatch, which pinched, and placed it on the desk beside various printed sheets and notes. She doubted that progress along the pre-arranged lines would be possible today. She doubted even whether Crystal Whedon would turn up. Crystal frequently walked out of school when upset, angry or bored. She was sometimes apprehended before she reached the gates and frog-marched back inside, swearing and shouting. At other times, she successfully evaded capture and escaped into days of truancy. 10:40 arrived, the bell sounded, and Tessa waited. Crystal burst in through the door at 10:51 and slammed it behind her. She slumped down in front of Tessa with her arms folded across her ample bosom, her cheap earrings swinging. "You can tell your husband," she said, her voice trembling, "that I never fucking laughed, all right?" "Don't swear at me, please, Crystal," said Tessa. "I never laughed, all right!" screamed Crystal. A group of sixth formers carrying folders had arrived in the library. They glanced through the glass pane in the door. One of them grinned at the sight of the back of Crystal's head. Tessa got up and let down the roller blind over the window, then returned to her seat. "All right, Crystal. Why don't you tell me what happened? Your husband said something about Mr. Fairbrother, right? And I couldn't hear what he was saying, right? So Nicky told me, and I couldn't fucking couldn't believe it, right? And I shouted, but I never laughed. I never fucked Crystal. I never laughed, all right?" shouted Crystal, arms tight across her chest, legs twisted together. "All right, Crystal." Tessa was used to the anger of students she saw most often in guidance. Many of them were devoid of workaday morals. They lied, misbehaved, and cheated routinely. And yet their fury when wrongly accused was limitless and genuine. Tessa thought she recognised this as authentic outrage, as opposed to the synthetic kind that Crystal was adept at producing. In any case, the squawk Tessa had heard during assembly had struck her at the time as one of shock and dismay rather than amusement. Tessa had been filled with dread when Colin had publicly identified it as laughter. "I seen Cubby, Crystal. I told your fucking husband, Crystal, for the last time, please do not swear at me. I told him I never laughed. I told him. And he still gave me fucking detention." Tears of fury gleamed in the girl's heavily penciled eyes. Blood had flowed into her face. Peony pink, she glared at Tessa, poised to run, to swear, to give Tessa the finger too. Nearly 2 years of gossamer fine trust, laboriously spun between them, was stretching, on the point of tearing. "I believe you, Crystal. I believe you can laugh, but please do not swear at me." Suddenly, stubby fingers were rubbing the smeary eyes. Tessa pulled a wad of tissues from out of her desk drawer and handed them across to Crystal, who blew her nose. Crystal's hands were the most touching part of her. The fingernails were short and broad, untidily painted, and all her movements were as naive and direct as a small child's. Tessa waited until Crystal's snorting breaths had slowed down. Then she said, "I can tell you're upset that Mr. Fairbrother has died." "Here I am," said Crystal with considerable aggression. "So?" Tessa had a sudden mental image of Barry listening into this conversation. She could see his rueful smile. She heard him quite clearly saying, "Bless her heart." Tessa closed her stinging eyes, unable to speak. She heard Crystal fidget, counted slowly to 10, and opened her eyes again. Crystal was staring at her, arms still folded, flushed and defiant looking. "I'm very sorry about Mr. Fairbrother too," said Tessa. "He was an old friend of ours, actually. That's the reason Mr. Wall is a bit—" "I told him I never—" "Crystal, please let me finish. Mr. Wall is very upset today, and that's probably why he misinterpreted what you did. I'll speak to him." "He won't change his butt, Crystal!" "Well, he won't." Crystal banged the leg of Tessa's desk with her foot, beating out a rapid rhythm. Tessa removed her elbows from the desk so as not to feel the vibration and said, "I'll speak to Mr. Wall." She adopted what she believed was a neutral expression and waited patiently for Crystal to come to her. Crystal sat in truculent silence, kicking the table leg, swallowing regularly. "What was wrong with Mr. Fairbrother?" she said at last. "They think an artery burst in his brain," said Tessa. "Why did it?" "He was born with a weakness he didn't know about," said Tessa. She knew that Crystal's familiarity with sudden death was greater than her own. People in Crystal's mother's circle died prematurely with such frequency that they might have been involved in some secret war of which the rest of the world knew nothing. Crystal had told Tessa how, when she was 6 years old, she had found the corpse of an unknown young man in her mother's bathroom. It had been the catalyst for one of her many removals into the care of her Nana Kath. Nana Kath loomed large in many of Crystal's stories about her childhood, a strange mixture of saviour and scourge. "Our crew will be fucked now," said Crystal. "No, it won't," said Tessa. "And don't swear, Crystal, please." "It will," said Crystal. Tessa wanted to contradict her, but the impulse was squashed by exhaustion. Crystal was right anyway, said the disconnected, rational part of Tessa's brain. The rowing 8 would be finished. Nobody except Barry had brought Crystal Whedon into any group and kept her there. She would leave. Tessa knew it, probably Crystal knew it herself. They sat for a while without speaking, and Tessa was too tired to find words that might have changed the atmosphere between them. "If you ain't going to talk to me, I'll go," said Crystal. "Don't be rude, please, Crystal," said Tessa. "I'm very tired this morning. Mr. Wall and I were at the hospital last night with Mr. Fairbrother's wife. They're good friends of ours." "I've seen his wife," said Crystal. "Blonde woman. She come to see us race." "Yes," said Tessa. Crystal was chewing on the tips of her fingers. "You were going to get me talking to the paper," she said abruptly. "What's that?" asked Tessa, confused. "Mr. Fairbrother was. He was going to get me interviewed on my own." There had once been a piece in the local paper about the Winterdown rowing team coming first in the regional finals. Crystal, whose reading was poor, had brought a copy of the paper in to show Tessa, and Tessa had read the article out loud, inserting exclamations of delight and admiration. It had been the happiest guidance session she had ever known. "Were they going to interview because of rowing?" asked Tessa. "The crew again?" "No," said Crystal. "Other stuff." "Then, when's his funeral?" "We don't know yet," said Tessa. Crystal gnawed at her nails, and Tessa could not summon the energy to break the silence that solidified around them.